Right, greetings, hello, welcome everybody. It's my philosophy club Sunday here in sleepy France in the middle of La Creuse, the old heartland of Gaul actually, where the Druids used to hang out in the days of Vercingetorix, and they're still hanging out around here. Yes, so today we're going to be still looking at science in relation to other traditions, spiritual traditions, and I'm going to be starting with a small selection of my library again, presenting a few books that I used during my research for the periodic table and for the philosophical study of all these traditions. I think it's quite fun to share different books on different occasions. Since we're doing science, I'm going to start with one of the great philosophers, Aristotle. I have the collected works of Aristotle here in the museum library, in both Latin and Greek, in fact. And, you know, Aristotle was a truly great philosopher. I studied him at university, and then I studied him independently. I discovered that I worked better independently outside of academia, because in academia you don't really study for the love of it. You study to get a good grade, to get, you know, a degree, to get a job. People are in it for the wrong reason. I wanted to study just for the sake of studying, because I wanted to find truth. So when I had to go to Canada to do that independently, outside of the formal academic system. But for 4 years I studied independently using the University of Calgary library, which is a great library. And that's where I read Aristotle for the first time. I'd never read him before. And I read the whole thing, which, you know, I was in my early 20s, and it was like a revelation reading Aristotle, because I thought, how is it possible that this guy wrote all this stuff over 2,000 years ago at such a high level of intellect? You know, the guy was discussing the very nature of thought. He was discussing the nature of the soul. He coined the word metaphysics because he wanted to understand what is being in itself, which is what he defined as metaphysics, meaning it's not about physics, stuff you can touch. It's the meaning of everything, metaphysics. And later, of course, I wrote my book on being and knowledge, kind of inspired by Aristotle. And basically Aristotle was a polymath and an all-round naturalist, a zoologist, a biologist, a physicist, a logical thinker, a psychologist, and a political scientist. He wrote the first political science tract that's known about. And he also invented ethics, in the sense that he wrote the first philosophical treatise on ethics, the difference between right and wrong, and how you can teach people that. So, you know, he had a mind of great stature, I realised, reading him. And yet we've sort of, it's a dying art. People don't read Aristotle anymore. And when I used to teach philosophy in secondary schools, I'd always introduce Aristotle to the students if I was in a school where that was possible. So if I was teaching thinking skills, I would bring in Aristotle, because he teaches the nature of thinking. What is it to think, you know? And how can we do it effectively? And how can we use the mind and the intellect to find truth? What's the distinguishing between intellectual arguments that are truthful and those that are false? These are incredibly important issues. And I discovered, I didn't just read Aristotle, I read the history of the Aristotelian tradition. So what had happened to Aristotle's legacy afterwards, where it had gone. And it was very important for a few hundred years. He ran the Lyceum in Athens, which was an academy where many great people were educated. But then, and he had Alexander the Great as his most famous pupil, who then established a huge Hellenic empire throughout the known world, and founded Alexandria, which became the great centre for intellectual studies. But unfortunately, you know, it sort of died a death with the loss of classical antiquity. People forgot the importance of all this. And it was only really revived in the 12th century in Paris, when the University of Paris was founded by Abelard, who had read his Aristotle. And those schoolmen in medieval France and Oxford and Cambridge, they were all reading Aristotle, because to them it was like, as it was to me, a kind of mind-blowing eye-opener to think that, what? This guy was doing all that? You know, like, what can we do then? And so they were writing treatises about the nature of light and physics and medicine. The secret of Aristotle, I discovered, is that his father was a medical doctor. And in those days, a medical doctor of a high level, like his father, who was the physician to the court of Macedonia and the father of Alexander the Great, they believed they were descended from, and it's probably true, they were descended from ancient physicians. To be a doctor sort of was in the family lineage. And it all went back to Apollo, whose son, the god of medicine, the name's gone for a second, his son was the founder of medicine, and Apollo bequeathed that medical knowledge to mankind. And so Aristotle was from that lineage. And I realised that, and that's what motivated him in his studies. He wasn't studying all this stuff just for fun. He wasn't studying just because it, you know, was a hobby. He was studying because he wanted to heal people. And he wanted to heal people because people are sick, you know. So that's why, for instance, he looked at psychology. How can we heal people's souls? What are souls? Where do they come from? Are they the same as the body, or are they something in the body? Where do they come from? You know, that's why he studied political science. He wanted to study, why is it that politics is so full of violence and lies? Why do people, you know, why is there so much violence and warfare and stuff? Even within cities, why is there class warfare? The rich and the poor at each other's throats all the time. Why? So I think what Aristotle was trying to do with his studies was he was applying medicine on a broader scale. And then the reason he wanted to study science, zoology, the nature of animals, biology, what are plants, botany, was because these things are all useful for medicine. Plants are used for healing. You know, to study animals, you can be applying animal medicine, which was, you know, a big thing in ancient Greece. So anyway, that's and all this is in. You can only learn this by going to the source and reading Aristotle himself. You know, selections. You don't have to read the whole thing. I was crazy and I had time on my hands, so I read the whole thing in English. And you know, there are professors of philosophy that just specialise in Aristotelian studies, and I've met a few of them. One of the greatest is a man called Richard Sorabji, who was professor at King's College, where I was a student for a time at the University of London, and who's involved with rediscovering some of Aristotle's lost works. Because although we have these texts that have come down, there are others that have vanished, and where are they? And you know, it's a really exciting thing to find them. And hopefully we'll find some lost library somewhere with the, you know, the missing texts of Aristotle. Like on religious studies, we have nothing that he wrote about religions, but he must have been interested in them. Okay, so, and he was really the founder of scientific method in many respects. That doesn't mean he got everything right. You know, he made mistakes, but he was asking the right question. Right, so the next thing I want to share is just, I have an enormous amount of scientific dictionaries. This is a classic work, Chambers Science and Technology Dictionary. So if I'm working on a scientific paper or doing some research, then, you know, this is a go-to reference book, because it's got, you know, a lot of science is about mastering the vocabulary, understanding the technical terms in whatever field of science you're working in, because the words just mushroom. And so it's really important to get a good reference dictionary. And this is one of the best that I've come across, and I use it quite a lot. Likewise, here's another reference book. This is absolutely amazing. When I was a teacher in schools, publishers would send sample books to us, to the staff room, and so there'd be like a book display, you know, do you want to order this book? And one time this thing appeared, the Oxford Companion to the Earth, University of Oxford Press. It's absolutely awesome, and it's got all the earth sciences, so geology, geography, weather science, climate science, also the names and histories of all the great earth scientists, people that have studied geology, the nature of rocks, what's in the earth's core, what's it made of, well, molten iron, but how do we discover that? How do we know that's true? It's all in here. What are the ages of the Earth? How's it changed and evolved over the last 4,000 million years? It's all in here. And it's over 1,000 pages of, there are entries like planetary geomorphology, which is how the Earth is changing its shape. So where I'm sitting here in the middle of France, go back a few million years, it was an active volcanic region not far from here, Auvergne. The Puy de Dôme, these are all volcanic remnants, and it was very different animals roaming about, during the dinosaur age and so on. So how do we know that's true? What fossils have we found, and how do we know that the planet changes over this huge timescales? So all the information's in here, and also about extinctions, what animals and stuff used to exist that don't exist anymore. And then how do the continents shape and how do they change? Different ideas to do with continental drift and stuff. So because I'm a Taurian, I love earthy type things. I'm quite a grounded person. And although I love higher ideas and floating up in the ether and stratosphere with the angels, I also think the earth's very sacred. And as a green philosopher, eco-philosopher, we need to respect and love this earth, treasure her, look after her, and learn her secrets, There's one chap here in the village who's a mining expert. He used to go to Africa and advise on mines. Not far from here, in the southern part of La Creuse, there are important mines that used to be making gold and even uranium up until recently. So there are some quite rocky bits of La Creuse. And this chap trained and studies as a mining expert. And that's fascinating. So here in this book you learn all about the different metals, minerals, crystals, gemstones. Where are diamonds from? Are there any in Europe, or do we have to go to India? I mean, is there a diamond mine in La Creuse? That'd be useful. So all the secrets are in here. The Oxford Companion to the Earth. Can't recommend it too highly. So next one I want to share is I've talked about biology, but one needs specialised dictionaries. So Oxford have this wonderful dictionary of biology that I use, which explains in detail what life is and what is inside the cell. And this is all stuff that mankind has only learned in the last couple of hundred years, since a Dutchman discovered or invented the microscope, to be able to analyse the microbes and the small, tiny things that we're all made of. And the cell, which was also Robert Hooke, who was the Secretary of the Royal Society. Him and this Dutch guy were in correspondence. And so was Isaac Newton in correspondence with Hooke, who wrote a book on the cell, Micrographica, I think it's called. But, it's a whole subject in and of itself, and people specialise, scientists, biologists, study just the cell, and there are so many mysteries that we don't know about the cell, even now. The DNA structure is kind of known, but I've been watching, and I'll come back to this again and again, I'm watching at the moment, I think, the most important science television series ever made by Carl Sagan. It's called Cosmos, and I recommend everybody to watch it. It's on DVD. It was 13 episodes, each a bit over an hour. I know one of the people that helped make the programme, who came to my castle in Scotland, who told me about the crew when they were filming it back in the 70s. Guy called Corky Quakenbush, great name. He's now an Aikido master and a martial artist and an all-round philosopher and sage, and we had some great chats when he stayed at the castle with me. And he told me about the making of the cosmos. It's just the best program about science. And I've just watched the episode on the cell and on the evolution of human life, because Carl Sagan, who was actually a planetary scientist, I'm going to come to that in a minute, an astronomer, he goes round using what was then cutting edge type of imagery and visual displays and stuff. This is all before computers, of course. He goes inside the cell and sees what it's made of. And there was an absolutely mind-blowing bit of data that was on the episode I was watching. Every strand of DNA, and he walks around this full blown up model of what a DNA molecule looks like. And it's kind of like 10 feet tall, and he's walking around it. And each of these balls in the model is an atom. And they all lock in a certain way, which creates the DNA molecule, which is at the root of every cell, and which is what gives us our genetic code, and which makes me different to other people. Each one of us is unique. We have unique facial features and so on. And what he said, which I found just mind-blowing, is that each DNA strand has 100 billion atoms in it, all arranged in a neat thing inside the cell. There's 100 billion atoms in your DNA molecules. And that's as many as there are stars in the galaxy. The Milky Way has 100 billion stars, approximately. And inside me, in every single one of my cells, there's 100 billion atoms, just forming the DNA alone. The more I study science, the more I'm left in wonder, because, and if you listen to Carl Sagan, I mean, your jaw is open the whole time, your mouth is open in wonder, listening to this guy explaining it all, because you think, where did it all come from? And Carl Sagan is absolutely the best communicator of scientific knowledge, I think, to a mass audience that I've met or come across. Unfortunately, he's dead now. It's very sad. We don't have a chance to chat. But we'll meet in the Heavenly Library, I'm sure. And his background's very interesting. He was from New York. He came from a Jewish family. The father was from the Ukraine, in fact. Amazing Ukrainian Jewish history. They were all Kabbalists and amazing mystics. And made it to New York, probably escaping some pogrom in the 19th century. Parents fell in love, and they were from the Reformed Jewish tradition, which is the most liberal, the most intellectual. The ones most of my friends have been Reformed Jews, like Rabbi Albert Friedlander, who was a good friend of mine in London. And so they value knowledge in and of itself, and they don't think knowledge is something you take out of the Bible. It can't be changed, can't be altered. It's actually Reformed Judaism is box number 78 in the periodic table. And so, yes, the revelations of the Bible are fantastic. We love them all, but we need to do our thinking now and then revisit the text and say, well, actually, that bit's probably wrong. Let's face it, that was written 4,000 years ago, and they didn't know anything about science. So the Bible says the earth is stuck in the middle of space and nothing changes, and it doesn't have a lot of science in it, and the world was created in 7 days and so on. So I'm with Sagan and the Reformed tradition of Judaism that says let's actually find out what truth is. So anyway, so that's the Dictionary of Biology, which mind-blowing the stuff that you can learn. And that leads me to my next book, which I want to share. It's called The Monkey Puzzle. And this is by a couple of authors. And it's a study of the family tree of all life and humanity. The DNA in me is closely related to the DNA in my cat, or a pigeon, or a chimpanzee. Carl Sagan, in that wonderful episode on evolution, explains that. And when we come to close relatives like the chimpanzee and the bonobo, who are both very close related to each other from Central Africa, we have a 99.8% DNA match with them. We human beings, I mean. Which means and they now have worked out through what's called molecular anthropology. So they're studying the genes of these ancient bones they dig up in Africa or wherever. They can go back in and get the DNA and then analyse the exact sequencing of these genetic codes, and they can match it against ours. And they can say, okay, it's like, very close. And so we come from a line of hominids that separated off from the chimpanzees and bonobos about 6 million years ago in Africa, which in geological time is nothing. One of the most impressive bits of the Cosmos film is when Carl Sagan produces what he calls the planetary calendar. And it's like a calendar with 12 blocks of time. So all of the planet's history, which is 4.5 billion years, is mapped out into 12 sequences, right? And he explains, he walks you through it, he says, this is what was happening then in the first 12th of the planet's history. This was happening then. So in the first bit, the planet was forming out of gas, dust, clouds, through the force of gravity. It was compacting in and becoming a material thing, from a sort of whirling cloud of dust and gas. That took a very long time. And then it started out and it got very hot and it was molten, a lot of it. You couldn't walk on it. It was like, it would burn you. It was like lava. So it took a long time to cool down. And then it took a while for things like water to appear, and oceans and so on. So he walks you through all this stuff. And life appears quite soon, actually. Life appears in the first of those calendar boxes, about 3.9 billion years ago. There are very simple living cellular creatures, actually found in rocks in Canada. But how long does it take to get humans? Okay, it's right down in the 12th box. In geological time, it's really, really recent. I mean, you've gone through all those other epochs before you come to the very last, month of the geological time calendar. And in fact, it's even in the last couple of minutes of that last geological month when hominids start appearing. Like 6 million years is nothing. It's a tiny bit of that last bit of the calendar, because you're talking 4,500 billion years, right? And then, so during that time span, our ancestors split off from the bonobo chimp line, and we started walking upright. We became bipedal, meaning we're walking around on 2 legs instead of 4 legs. Chimps and bonobos mostly put about on 4 legs. They can stand up and do the 2-leg thing, but it's not their chosen preferred thing. Something happened to our ancestors that made them stand up as a permanent thing. And we lost our hair, we became naked, and we got because we were standing up, we had the ability to hold things. Our hands became incredibly important, which isn't the case in other animals. And our hands became a very sophisticated tool. So we could start making tools out of stones and rocks and stuff, like axes and things. And then we started making simple clothes. And when we get into the hominid line of Homo sapiens, we're making, sophisticated tools, shelters, and mastering fire. And then speech comes. And its speech comes because of the activity of the hands, and we have this ability to juxtapose the thumb with the fingers. That's the secret of the Homo sapiens. Other animals can't do that, which means I can hold my glasses and I can put them on, carefully, and I can read stuff. Other animals can't do this. So anyway, this book tells the whole story, how we evolved, which line exactly, which monkeys are related to us. And if you want to know the details, watch this film on Netflix called The Chimp Empire, which is on at the moment. It's filmed in Africa, close to where the ancestral line of these hominids evolved. And it's all about the power dynamics of these chimps. And they were pretty ruthless, pretty like, you know, Putin and the Wagner mercenaries, and, you know, they were pretty ruthless kind of characters, these chimps. Fortunately, there's another streak in us, which is the bonobos, which is much more friendly and cuddly and loving. It's as if the humans are split within this dual lineage. There are ruthless killers among us, and then there are loving, kindly people. Anyway, that's still all being researched, and I'm writing a book about all that at the moment. So this is one of the amazing resources that I use. Going out, let's just, because I'm talking to you about Carl Sagan, this is Companion to the Cosmos. Now, I'm in love with the cosmos, and I could have been an astronomer. I mean, I would love to study. I mean, can you imagine just being an astronomer and looking through incredibly sophisticated telescopes? I spent months studying astronomy and trying to work out how it all works and where it came from. Gravity, particularly, has always fascinated me. I have a theory of gravity that might explain how it works. So, yeah, and I've been to where Newton studied and developed his theories of gravity, but he never explained what it was or where it comes from. He just did the maths of gravity. The big question that the next generation of scientists will have to work on is, like, what causes gravity? Where does it come from? And there are these things called gravity waves, which have not been fully explained. Could it be an energy source for the future? I think possibly. And if I was, if I had a whole university of research laboratories and stuff, I would get people working on that. There is a research institute for gravitational waves at the University of Glasgow, but they don't seem to have discovered much. It's very disappointing. But anyway, where does it all come from, and how can we work it out? That's the study of cosmology, and this is a dictionary of cosmology, which is absolutely fascinating and important stuff. And although Carl Sagan died, his series was on television in like 1979, I think. A lot of it is still, it hasn't been superseded. What I like about him is that he was humbled with all his knowledge. He was able to say what we know, but then he says, well, there's so much we don't know. And one of the things he was exploring is whether there's intelligence in other parts of the universe. I mean, if you're a cynic, you might say if there's any intelligence on Earth. But, there's pockets of it here and there. There are a few philosophers. But probably elsewhere in the universe there are intelligent beings just like us, is what Carl Sagan said. And he founded research centres that were looking for extraterrestrial intelligence, which was pretty leading edge stuff back in the 1970s. And we still don't know, we certainly haven't got proof, officially that yes, there are intelligent beings. I mean, I believe there are, like Sagan did, and I'm sure that they have cracked ethics. They've had their Aristotles on their planets who taught basic ethics, and they've cracked war and peace, because we're still on this planet at the level of basically just glorified chimpanzees that bash each other on the head with sticks and throw stones at each other. Only our stones are like nuclear missiles and horrendous weapons. And that's what Putin is doing in the Ukraine, and what they're doing in Khartoum and Sudan now. They're just firing at each other, And I'm sure that on other planets, if a planet has cracked the speed of light, which is a barrier, an intellectual barrier you have to get through to do any travelling about, I believe that other planets will have cracked the speed of light. Then they must surely have cracked the ethical barrier of knowing the difference between right and wrong. When it's fine to bomb and kill innocent civilians and men and women and children, and bomb schools and hospitals like Putin's been doing, I don't think those kind of people get to know the secrets of the speed of light. We have to prove, I think, ethically that we're intelligent, morally as well as scientifically, to qualify and become part of the civilized planets. I think, and if we don't make it, if we fail, then this planet will self-destroy, and I'm sure that has happened. Tragically, that is something that might, happen in some planets. I hope it doesn't happen on this one, because I think this one is beautiful. It's worth saving. There's enough good people around, and we have to activate those good genes in us. So anyway, that's putting the whole thing in a bigger picture. I just want to mention, okay, so why bother with all this? Well, I'm also a doctor, you see. I'm like Aristotle. I'm only doing this for healing purposes. I want to heal this planet so that we don't self-destruct. To me, this planet is like a mental patient with suicidal tendencies. And, that's why I've designed the table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions. It's like a doctor providing a diagnostic tool that we can say, that lot, they've got too much of that box, and they haven't realised that you can balance it with this box. People are stuck in their own egotism or narcissism of my way or the highway, and that is a form of mental illness, actually. So I worked for many years, 4 or 5 years, as a nursing auxiliary in Canada, and then at the National Hospital of Nervous Diseases in London, in Bloomsbury. And I became fascinated by medicine. I've got lots of medical dictionaries in this thing. Here's a definition of suicide, for instance. Self-destruction as an intentional act. It's a medical problem, And planetary suicide is a serious medical problem. So would be planetary thermonuclear war, when hundreds of millions of people would die. So I made a career decision, way back then when I was working in hospitals. Did I want to train as a medical doctor? And I was very tempted. Or do I want to be a philosopher, an educator, and a planetary doctor? Like a social scientist of collective healing, as it were. And of course there isn't a profession for that, really. It was a career move. It was very bad. Obviously, if I'd have been a doctor, I'd be I could have been a top physician working in a plumbing hospital with a salary of vast amounts and, all that stuff. But I decided that was, that there were plenty of people who could do that. Let them do that. My duty was to try and work on the overview of planetary healing. So that trying to develop a new science, a new medicine, if you want, that heals the collective psyche of humanity. As Jung said, it's in the collective unconscious that these phobias and these crazinesses are happening. So how can we use all the wisdom of humanity to heal humanity? So that's why I went into studying psychology and transpersonal psychology and history, because that's my diagnostic tool. But that doesn't mean I'm not deeply in love with medicine, and I keep track of all the recent medical discoveries. The latest thing is AI. Maybe that's going to help. Certainly with diagnostics, AI is going to help, and that's quite exciting. That you'll be able to look at some data on a patient, and through the AI scans they'll be able to tell you, yeah, that's the problem. That doesn't mean that it replaces the need for a good physician, but it just means the physician is then supported by huge amounts of data. The same with the legal profession, by the way. There's now people trying to say, let's use AI in law, so that if I'm in court and I'm a lawyer and I'm defending this guy who's been accused of such and such, I'll be able to access through my AI tool every single previous case where this kind of stuff was an issue. I'll be able to immediately download from the web. The AI tool will, and it'll be on my glasses, so I'll be sitting there defending the guy, and it'll say, yeah, refer to that case in 1943 when